This is John Firth, and this is our final installment of the our fall series of Firth and Friends. And I have here two friends of mine, two very good friends, fellow coaches and consultants, but primarily coaches. That means we deal a lot with mindsets, behaviors, especially those that are unproductive and disempowering. And we're going to talk about two of those in a moment, i.e. denial and resistance, which don't necessarily mean that they're bad. They really are just there. For us as coaches, though, we have to recognize what's going on underneath moments when our clients are obviously in denial, or more importantly, when they're resisting something. And it doesn't have to be change. It can be a lot of different things. So I thought we'd start off today's conversation with us giving some personal stories. And by the way, we welcome all comments. It's great to be able to interact, although we have no idea who you guys are right now who are watching this. So in my case, I'll start with my resistance. When I started being a coach, I was with Vistage, and we had something called the Vistage Chair Group, where chairs in a region would get together every other month and kind of work on themselves and develop their craft as a coach. And very early on, I was confronted with the fact that I was a control freak. Now, at that moment, I did not want to hear that for a variety of reasons. And I didn't even hear it as that because I was so busy resisting it. And I got quite angry. And so my form of resistance, or what the world saw, was defensiveness, was giving them explanations why they were wrong, and generally pushing back. But it did get the wheels going. And obviously, after a certain point, I suddenly realized they were right. But I was in denial and I was resisting. So, Darren, what about you?
I will say I was in denial and resistant to the fact that I was depressed more than I have ever been after the successful exit of a business. I didn't realize how much I had aligned my personal and my business assets to this business. And once it was gone, then I was empty. I became irrelevant. And it took me a while to finally own up to the fact that, you get depressed sometimes and you need some help.
And relevance is important to you. Relevance is important to you, yeah.
Yeah, and relevance is extremely important to any high-functioning, successful-minded individual.
Yeah, what we call hyperachievers, which both of us are. Yeah, it's interesting you say that because this is, I have this group, executives over 50, for basically people leaving corporate America and have to figure out what they're going to do next. The men, almost to a T, always say one of their priorities is to remain relevant and impactful. It's very important. I hate to make the distinction between men and women, but almost to a T, every man says that. Very few women say that. We can go into that at some point. But impactfulness, I think, is very important. And it is hard. It's easy to lose and hard to regain.
Yeah.
Good. Clayton, what about you?
Denial and resistance. So for me, denial always shows up before I need to leave a situation of any kind. And the top ones that come up for me are either relationships, relationships that I needed to leave. And part of that process was being in denial about that those relationships weren't for me at that time, or it wasn't serving me, or wasn't really what I was looking for, or vice versa. And then the other one that comes up for me is job situations. Every job I've ever needed to leave, I spent some period of time, months, I don't think ever years, but at least, often months of denial, of not realizing that, or not being able to admit to myself that, this no longer brings me joy. This doesn't feel like the way I actually want to use my energy, my time. The only reason I'm staying is because I'm afraid that I won't land somewhere safe and secure, things like that I was in a lot of denial about in order to move ahead.
Yeah, and the way I would phrase it is, the grass always is greener on the other side, which is a way of our brains getting in the middle of it. So yeah, it does look better, but I should be happy here. And the other thing is, the monster, you don't know the monster you don't know. And that's part of, I think, what I'm hearing. At least in my case, I did similar things. And then if you're making good money, that's a golden handcuff. But what was it for both of you? What were defining moments when you realized you were in denial and you were resisting? And what happened after that? Was there a specific moment or a series of moments that happened that turns it around?
Yeah. So for me, it happened while I was hiking with a buddy. We were hiking the Stairway to Heaven, very apropos, in New
Okay.
Jersey along the
Where is that?
Appalachian Trail.
Where?
It's in New Jersey. It's on the
Okay.
Appalachian Trail, and I
Uh-huh.
turned to him. He had also sold his business a year prior, and we were talking about the ups and downs of life after deal, or life after the deal,
Uh-huh.
which is something that people don't really talk about, right? It gets a lot of "woe is you" sarcasm, right? But
Right.
at the end of the day, we're all humans.
Sarcasm.
We have emotions,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
I said to him, I'm really depressed. I'm finally admitting that I'm really depressed. And he asked why. And I said, I just don't feel like I have purpose. I don't feel relevant. And he stopped in his tracks. I mentally recorded it, but I wish I physically
Uh-huh.
recorded it. And he turned to me and goes, Darren, man, you have purpose. You're relevant. You're a great father. You inspired
Uh-huh.
many. You
Mhm.
lived a business dream. Why do you keep tying purpose and relevancy to work?
Oh boy.
And it was
Yeah.
that click of a sentence right there where I realized, shit, purpose and relevancy is life. It's not just work. It's the full circle, the aspect that makes you a person. And it was
Mhm.
also from that moment that I realized I should have recorded this. And that's when I started I Took a Hike, the podcast.
Oh, interesting.
That was the
Now
moment.
I know the backstory. Yeah, I think um, it's those moments when somebody actually says something like that in my case at least has really sort of done the trick. But it's always a moment of timing. Had he said that to you a year earlier, you might have resisted it and denied it and say, no, you don't understand. In my case, la la.
Well, I absolutely would have, because you have to hit rock bottom to seek and listen to guidance, support, and help. And in my case, the rock
Yeah.
bottom was this hike. He pulled me out of my shell and said, "We're taking a hike. Let's go."
Interesting. What about you, Clayton? Was there a defining moment?
Yeah, definitely. I really agree with what Darren just said about having to hit some kind of a bottom to make change. You
Some
know,
kind
some
of a bottom up. Yeah.
other people describe it as like, disruption, or breakdown, has to occur before growth can occur.
Mhm.
And I think that's true. In terms of moments where I've understood or seen clearly my own denial, the truth is I don't think I ever see it clearly until later. So
Okay, I buy that. Yeah.
it's until the situation. Usually I'm feeling my way through,
Mhm.
these situations in life or in work. Often I'm thinking about, the times when I've been in denial. There's often a lot of conflict that starts to come up. I start to have issues with people that I wouldn't otherwise have.
Okay.
Thinking of like being in a job that maybe is no longer serving me, and then for one reason or another, my subconscious will, or my conscious brain will come up with some set of reasons that's enough to
Mhm.
get me out of the situation.
Mhm.
My subconscious brain knows the truth, which is this is no longer for me and I need to move forward. But maybe my conscious mind needs to believe this is out of my control, or this is somehow because of this external factor, I'm forced to do this. I got to do this now, or I had no choice, right?
So
And
that's
then
it.
only,
That's an
and then
interesting construct. Yeah. Sorry.
so just to finish that point out, only in looking back, after those moments have occurred and I'm no longer in those situations, I look back and I say, oh, I was in denial, and I actually, I realize now looking at it that I just no longer wanted to be in that place in life, and I found a way to get out without being able to admit it to myself at the
Yeah.
time.
So you bring up the concept of subconscious or unconscious and your consciousness. For me, your unconsciousness are your belief systems, and they're almost semi-conscious sometimes. And then your mindset becomes more conscious, and then your state of being is a little more concrete or conscious. And then what comes out of this is this model I constantly use that I developed. Then it's exhibited to the world in actions and behaviors and communications and decisions, which also can be somewhat unconscious. This is this concept of we can't see ourselves objectively. So we're
Yeah.
doing all this stuff, but a lot of life can be semi-conscious, that you're not actually being mindful. So that brings me to the second topic. By the way, for anybody who's joined us in the last couple of minutes, this is denial is not just, denial is not just a river in Egypt. It's why we go and why we resist. What's really going on when we resist change. That was a long title.
By the way, my
Anyhow.
father is so happy that we're using this joke of his.
I forget where I first started it, but it was awesome.
Yeah.
Denial is not just a river in Egypt. But let's talk about now.
Everyone's dad made that joke up.
I know.
Exactly.
Mine didn't. I just don't know who did it. My father was not very funny.
Well, they wore it proudly like they invented it.
And I will do the same.
Yes, I do.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yes.
For good and for bad. So let's talk about this thing as a coach and just generally how we deal with this semi-conscious nature of a lot of what we do, from the deep and unconscious, which is belief systems that are sometimes very hard to even figure out because they're deep, to what we think is conscious, which are our actions and our behaviors and so forth. So Clayton, maybe since you brought it up, tell us a little bit about your thinking between unconscious and consciousness.
Sure. I think that your initial kind of approach to it was interesting because it revealed a truth that the difference is not always clear between subconscious and unconscious. And I think a lot of the work that we do as coaches is to bring the subconscious into the conscious space so that we can do something with it. And then I think other times the subconscious never gets to the conscious space. There are things going on that are genuinely beyond comprehension for us, that are true for us. So to bring it to maybe a more specific technical example, with many of my coaching clients recently, I've gotten really into this exercise of writing out your beliefs. And I don't think it's I'm not claiming that it's a super novel thing to do, but it's just something I got excited about in the past few months, where if someone's struggling with anything, myself included, right? Any type of a confusion. For instance, I felt confused and blocked around what to use as my artist name. Should I use Clayton Fujimura, my real name, quote unquote, or should I use a stage name, a pseudonym? And I've gone through different stage names and pseudonyms throughout my career. So I was feeling very blocked about this. And the exercise is just to write out some of the concepts that you're feeling blocked around. So my name, Clayton, first name, my last name, Fujimura, and then my stage name, Clay Sabeo, right? Put these three things and then just go for it, writing everything I believe about those things. Okay, Clayton, I believe this, I believe that blank about Clayton. I believe blank, I believe blank, I believe blank. Just keep going, positive, negative, neutral, anything you can think of. Maybe it's a job, my job, my profession. I believe blank about this profession, or my diagnosis, the illness I just received. I believe blank about this diagnosis. As many things as you can think of that you believe, even if you don't 100% believe them. Maybe only part of you believes it and another part of you disagrees. Then write both of them, and get a long ass list of all these things that you believe, and then come back to it in a few days, sleep on it, and then look at that list. And for me, in the names example, when I looked at just what I believed about my first name, last name, and stage name, it was very enlightening. I'll just say that much. The
Can
things
you say how? Can you tell us? Give us an example.
I mean, there's a lot there, and it would take me a lot of context to really fully explain it to you. But basically, the baggage I was associating with each of these names in different ways. The positives, but also the negatives that I had somewhere along my journey associated these beliefs with these names. And are they true? So that's an example of bringing what was subconscious, right? These beliefs I was acting on into the conscious mind, right? And just that activity of just looking at them with my eyes, writing them out with my hands, making them conscious, kind of did the work on its own.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I've written a book, but I'm also doing speeches. And one of my things my speech coach said when I always have this feeling that what I'm writing isn't totally reflective of things. It misses something. And he said, no, write it out by hand. Don't type it. He said, because this motor eye-hand coordination, that thing is exactly what you're saying. It's a much better way to get things out that are in your head, even if it's a mess, because it always looks like a mess when I'm finished with it. So I think, I'm sure scientists and, doctors can explain the phenomenon more. But yeah, the act of physically writing something out is a great way to bring stuff up in ways that become conscious, and then you can work with it. What about you, Darren? I mean, by the way, that I'm going to write that down. It's a technique I'm going to start using. It's great.
So
Thank you.
I'll continue on the brain-body connection because, our unconscious or a subconscious, that's our autopilot. That's our default bias. It's learned behavior, intuition, seared into our brain, our 10,000 hours of being a human, being alive, right? And that can
it's our perception of events.
It's our perception of the reality as we choose to see it.
Yes.
But it is not the reality of another person. And I know that sounds very existential, which it is, right?
It's true. It's a truism. Absolutely.
It is. And, where I fit in my coaching style, and, when I first started coaching, I tried to be the coach I thought I should be. Right.
Word up.
Another belief. And I think,
and I think that's the hardest challenge for anybody who's going to call themselves an open quote, close quote coach, right? Is what type of coach are you? Until you finally realize that the singer on stage should be themselves. And whether or not the audience likes the singer is up to the audience. So I ultimately gravitated to what I knew best. And my style of coaching is to essentially witness your subconscious, your default bias, the way that you react as the CEO or the executive or business owner, and step in and correct you as a referee. Right. And when I first started, I resisted that because I thought no one wants a referee to tell them in their business they're doing it wrong.
Right.
But that's when I realized that's exactly what some people who are no longer in denial that they need help actually need. Someone who has had the experience, been through a situation that they haven't been, to say, hold on, you're going to go down a road, make a mistake that I already did. Let me tell you to pump the brakes. Your default bias is wrong. Your reaction is wrong. The way that you handle the situation is wrong. Why don't we try something else? And that's where I bring the subconscious back into the conscious.
So there's one element that I would include, and maybe a slight pushback, which is it's all about timing. There are moments when you will say something, you may say it several times, and it's not sticking. And you might actually get a lot of resistance, I guess, which brings me to the next subtopic.
Real quick,
when you get resistance?
Timing is everything. You asked me before, had the conversation about my relevancy happened a year prior, would it have had effect? No, it wouldn't have, because I would have still been in denial of the fact that something's wrong. I just can't put a finger on it. Right.
And you're not ready. You're not ready to hear it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and that's for me, it's all about timing. I'm very intuitive. I have a lot of experience. I'm not God, but I do see a lot of things, and you can tell through body language, energy, the level of trust you achieve when you just can't say exactly what you're thinking, because it could disrupt this trust. It could make, if you're really in denial, as I was about my need to control, your first thought is, these guys don't understand me. They don't get me. That was the thing that was going through my head the whole time. That is what you do not want a client to start thinking. And so if you bring something up that's too confrontational.
Or another one is like, they don't understand, you don't understand my business. It's
right.
Like, no, I got it. I hate that.
That's the worst thing that anyone could ever say to a consultant, because at the end of the day, business is fundamentally the same. P&Ls are P&Ls. Top line and bottom line is the same. You might make a different color widget than the next client.
Well, and it's also like this.
There's uniformity here.
100%, Darren, and it's also like, this didn't come up when I was telling you how good you're doing. This criticism of my understanding of your industry happens to have arisen at a time when I was giving you a hard time about something.
Well, the other frustrating pushback is we do it because that's the way we have always done it. And that is denial right there.
Oh my God, that is like
Or
so obvious.
resistance.
It's like, didn't you hear what you just said to me?
Yes.
Those are the moments where I go, are you not listening to yourself?
That's where we could probably all relate. Our job as a coach is to be the speaker and just say, hold on, pause, repeat what you just said. Do you hear the error? And that's where you coach and say, what you just told me is you've been doing something this way forever, yet you hired me, which means something was done wrong, and you've probably been doing it wrong forever.
Yeah.
Reflection. Holding the mirror, holding up the mirror, because we all know what's up. We know where we're trying to go deep down. We know what the truth is deep down. That's why we hired a coach. That's why we called a friend. That's why we're seeing a therapist. That's why we're at the doctor's office. We know what's going on. We need support.
We know something's going on, and indeed, you may be right. We may actually very deeply know what the problem is. It is true, but there are moments where you're so in denial that all you know is there's something going on that's not good. I mean,
can I ask you guys a question? Do you often feel like your clients find you when it's almost too late?
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's an interesting question.
Right. So I have found, at least with my clients, and I say this to all of them, is you should have sought finding a business therapist or a coach last year, the year before. Now you're coming with these very complex problems, and it's all, again, because of denial and resistance. The partnership issues have grown and festered so far.
Partnership issues.
It's always partnership. Yeah, it's always partnership.
If you have a partner, if you have truly a partner, they always come up too late. They always
too late. The marriage is over. You're infighting. The children see it, but it's still solvable and fixable, right? You took the step. But I always tell those clients that you're almost too late. We're going to work really hard, which means now you can't be resistant or have denial. You have to listen. And that's very difficult for some people.
Boy, that's the he may be listening, but I have a client who I was just emailing about that exact issue. And I asked him to see if he could come to this because, yes, I knew this topic was going to come up, the partnership aspect. But Clayton, you were going to say?
Well, yeah, I believe in divine timing. And so my question is always, too late for what? Too late for what? It definitely often too late for the partnership between business owners, too late for the marriage to be saved. In one specific case I had, it was too late to maintain a number of staff members who, after I started doing, I was coaching each individually, and they all ended up quitting because that's what they needed to do, and that's what was best for them. And so too late for what, right? In that case, it's like, well, it's too late to retain these staff, and that's unfortunate. But divine timing, like, did you want to stay in a marriage that isn't working for you? Is it like, can we look at the outcomes here and ask ourselves, is there only one good way that this can go? And sometimes the end of something is what needs to happen, and maybe it can happen quicker.
And that's another topic, which is how we deal with failure, because a lot of failure, it also depends on how you define failure. But if you are failing, let's just take a generic failing. Let's say you're about to get fired or your business is about to go bankrupt. It's amazing to see how people save themselves by going into denial and resisting. It's almost like somebody out in the water, in the lake or an ocean, who are drowning. They start pulling everybody down with them because it gets, but they don't themselves know that that's counterproductive to what it needs to happen. So for me, if you say it's too late, it could be that they're literally drowning, and that saving them is going to be very, very difficult. And to make it less traumatic, if they're going to go bankrupt, sometimes you can't save them from bankruptcy. And it's not something I would wish on any of my clients, but I have had one or two clients go bankrupt, mostly because they weren't listening and they were in denial.
And Darren mentioned earlier too, you got to get the moment when you ask for help, right? You have to have overcome some amount of denial, and that's the right timing. Whatever the outcome is going to be.
What are the voices in your head going? What's going on with that? when a door opens suddenly and you're no longer, you realize you might have a problem, you might be in denial. What do you reckon? What do you see? In my case, somebody somewhere has said something to the person. And since we all pretty much work with business owners or CEOs, somebody in their leadership team, or maybe even their assistant, often it's the assistant, will say something and say it several times that at least gives them an indication that they're not infallible, for example.
Thinking back to my recent clients, it's usually when they hit such a frustration level that they wake up hating coming into the office. It is unbearable that for them to even conceive being in the company. And I've had some very aggressive partnership battles happen in front of me, and I've had to separate. When I was meeting people in person, now it's mostly Zoom these days for efficiency, but I've had to separate two partners before, and thankfully
That's wild, bro.
You know what? I'll add some successes. They're thriving right now. We got the disagreement solved, but it took a referee to literally say, "Are you guys nuts? You also have a glass office. Your employees are watching this. What is going on?" Right?
Yeah.
But it takes that's why I say to my clients, it's almost too late, but it's not. We're going to solve this as long as you're open to listen. It really takes them just being on that border of complete destruction. Yeah. And maybe, I've never actually asked this to the clients, and I think I will from now on, but what gave you that notion, that push? Was it your spouse saying you need help, or was it a partner finally turning, or an employee quitting? It's a question that I'm curious about.
Employee quitting can be often a huge motivator. Because certainly when you're an entrepreneur, you depend on your staff so much because you usually don't have enough of them.
Yep.
And they have institutional knowledge, especially if they're a good friend. Then it is. But Clayton, you have some examples out of your client work?
Of what specifically?
Of how people suddenly, or what is the process, or how does it happen with your clients that they decide they actually need external help?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's unmanageability. Some have described it as unmanageability when one's life or business is it just is chaotic, and you can't seem to get it to go the direction you want it to go. Right. All the effort in the world is not paying off, and so something is wrong, right? It's out of control.
All the shit is on the wall, and you have no more wall to throw shit at.
Exactly. And then another big one I think is repetition, which has been in kind of both of what your answers have been. The picture that you both are painting is like repetition, man, like year over, being back another year, same revenue number, same number of staff. What's going on? Okay, maybe you're not ready this year, but here comes 2024 taxes, same revenue, same number of staff, different staff, they all turned over. So what's going on?
Oh my God, it's amazing how the brain kicks in at those moments. The excuses you hear, and the economy, this, and I lost a key employee here, and I was bought by a conglomerate, and they don't understand my business, and so I've missed my numbers because they put all sorts of things in excuse after excuse after excuse. And usually said, we do have a level of empathy that becomes sympathy very easily. And, I do at least put up with some of the excuses, but I also know the time will come.
You have to. That sympathy, care. We're in a caring profession.
Yeah.
We are in a caring profession. And there are so many instances I can think of where I have been witness to denial, and suggested some things, and it didn't quite land, and then maybe a couple months later suggest some things, and then another couple months go by, and kind of saying things in different ways, trying things in different ways, and that patience and that care, right? It doesn't make you a coach when you can see that someone's in denial. It makes you a coach when you're willing to walk hand in hand with them and stay in the ring with them until you both can grow, from the experience.
And also, uh, what I call carefrontation is that when it comes time to let them know the truth, and I can tell you exactly what happens with me, is my patience is gone suddenly. And there are lots of, I mean, it's just gone. It's just like, all right, I have to say it. But it's saying it in a way, even at that moment, that curbs my desire. And I see Darren nodding to just say, listen, do you realize what you're doing?
Oh, hold on, John, you said carefrontation. So,
Yeah.
do I have your permission to tell you what you're doing wrong?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
a little bit
please.
softer than that, but
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
because then you're getting the permission and they're tuning up. They gave you the permission to now say, well, here's how I see it. I see a lot of resistance to accountability and blame. And this is often the biggest challenge with any small business owner that doesn't have a board or a partner that really holds them accountable.
Yep.
And I will make an example. You have a salesperson who is responsible for a quota every month, every quarter. If they miss their quota, we train, we advise, we guide, we lead, we manage, hold them accountable, maybe a performance plan, maybe even we throw around the word of termination.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
We'll do it.
But if you have a CEO who is responsible for quota in sales and they miss it, I always hear, we'll get it next month. The customer didn't want to sign right now. There's a million excuses. And that's where a good coach, advisor, or consultant comes in and says, no, hold on. You're falling backwards because of the way you've always done it, which is no accountability for yourself. And then I often correct business owners because this is so ugly to me. You did not go into business for yourself to be your own boss.
Right.
That could not be any further from the truth. You report to everyone, your employees, your customers, your spouse, your partner, when you go into business, if you're not just a solopreneur. Right. You went into business to become your own manager. And that is the right narrative. If you want to take vacation, you can take vacation. But if you're doing the right thing, you checked off all the things you needed to do before vacation. And well, we've all been business owners. You're also working from that chair somewhere else, right?
Yeah. So, but it's interesting. I had a client who about a year into it was starting to say really freaky things about being a CEO. Things like he was losing all of his top performers. And I said, look, you got to reward your top performers and maybe let go of the underperformers. That's the way it's normally done. His response was, I don't want to be that kind of boss. I said, what? You don't want to be successful?
Yeah.
Well, after that moment, he began to totally reevaluate building an organization. It's happened actually twice where they just said, no, you know what? I'll make more. And this is usually when business is barely making money. He said, you know, if I go independent to this big client that my company has, and I just go as an independent, he said, I'll be making $500,000 and I won't have the stress. And I'm not making that now. And he decided, I don't want to be a CEO anymore. It was that moment when he said, I don't want to be that kind of boss, that I knew he shouldn't be doing this. And I think he did at that moment too.
So that's where denial became reality.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I would say is listening to words. There's 2 or 3 events that happens when I pounce, for lack of a better term. One is when what they're saying is coming out of their mouth is contrary to what they're trying to tell me. For example, you know, I'm an advocate of asking questions in lots of situations to calm things down, to actually get true information and so forth. And he was trying to convince me that he had done that. He slipped out of his mind. He said, and I told him, or I commanded him. I said, do you realize what you just said? Well, no, I mean, but I was like, no, you said. I told them like unequivocally, you did not ask them. Well, I asked them why. And I said, well, when you asked them why, that's like you might as well hit them in the face. Why did you do this?
Yeah, it's like barking an order to your children. They just don't really respond well to that.
No.
Yeah, you're both describing like providing a peer experience for CEOs and entrepreneurs, and I think that's really important. There's a certain irony that this is more of maybe a question for both of you than it is a statement. But isn't there's something weird about the folks who become, there's something going on with folks who become entrepreneurs and business owners because they don't want to see themselves as underneath a hierarchy or being sort of bossed at or managed.
Right.
And yet the number one thing that they need is accountability and like peer support, and then so I end up in these conversations with people who are, the thing that they're asking for is by hiring a coach, which is accountability and peer experience, and sometimes even a managerial sort of hierarchical experience with someone that they're not having in the workplace. They came to me for that, and yet they're the exact type of person who hates that the most, or who has resisted that the most, or who doesn't want that the most. And so it can be this, I don't know, tension. I'm not sure if I phrased the question there, or an answer, friends. I just some observations.
I actually have one of my best performing CEOs. He was actually a hired CEO, but the guy who owned his company was a business partner of Mark Cuban. So even though he's not a household name, he's obviously highly successful. And the guy had a management style where he really sort of let my client sort of run a lot of things. And I was doing video testimonials for, unusual reasons. And he said, I hired John, so I had somebody who would hold me accountable, because I essentially don't have anybody holding me accountable. And that was good. And he was very good about that. He was very disciplined about taking accountability, which of course would come to the conversation of the difference between being an entrepreneur and being a hired CEO. I actually was never an entrepreneur. I was a hired CEO. And I had accountability. I had the board, who ultimately I disagreed. I was more and more in disagreement with, which is why I finally left in a not very good way. So I felt I've always been held accountable. Now nobody holds me accountable. So I can now sympathize with entrepreneurs when they say, I just can't seem to get it together. I'm not productive, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, totally. You need a third party.
The other one with that is entrepreneurs being like, why don't my staff take ownership, but they only have successful working relationships with people who just like do whatever they say.
It's always the staff's problem. It's always a problem.
We could talk about the staff issue, because the blame game is rampant with just about every struggling CXO on the planet, right? And what they don't seem to grasp is, you as the CEO or the business owner, you have skin in the game. Your employee does
more than skin in the game.
Yeah. So if you don't, you can't hold your employee to the same standards unless you have fostered this amazing culture, the cliched culture word, right? If you don't really insulate and support your employees, they're never going to be you. They're never going to act like you, think like you, because they haven't had your experiences. So the blame game, it really just needs to be a reflective mirror.
Yeah.
And that's where coaching really takes force, is when you can get through the denial barrier, because the pain and the suffering has been so long. The anger and frustration from the CEO or the business owners is so great that you can finally say, hold on, why don't we try something new? Not the old way we used to do things, but something new.
Yeah.
And that's where you really start to break through. Your employees can be trusted if you trust them.
And if they are indeed the right person. I mean, there are situations where I'm sure you've had lots of guys who have like hired the first person that walked in the door because they were desperate, and time is money, and this guy isn't good. And then they realize, they're not good. There is a lot of that going on too. That's also a form of denial. Well,
a lot of these are generalities, because that's all we could talk about without a real example in front of us. But they're universal generalities that we see in every business, right? Every small business owner is afraid to terminate that wrong employee that's sitting in the wrong position, because who else are they going to hire, right?
Right. And they see work I have to do. Now I got to go back and go out there and find somebody.
And it's impossible to find someone, and we keep finding the wrong person, and we don't get good application. It's the same cliched stuff over and over again. Whereas if we put in a little bit of that work, then we can actually foster a great organization. But that's where the denial and the change has to come in.
Yeah.
Right.
So
and everybody needs accountability, myself included.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I have a question.
A personal board of advisors if you don't have one. In fact, for me, my accountability comes from LinkedIn. I do so much posting that now I feel beholden to keep that up, and I feel judged if I don't keep it up. But I thrived the most when I had partners in my former business, because I worked for them.
Right.
and with them.
Right.
So I couldn't make the excuse because my partners would call bullshit.
Yep.
And I would do the same on them as well. So the accountability is really important.
Oh, absolutely, on multiple
Mhm.
levels. But Clayton, you were going to say something, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
In life, right? Accountability. We all need accountability, and entrepreneurs and CEOs happen to be the people who've done all that it takes to get away from that, and then they hire a coach. So here we are.
Both are.
My question for you guys is, okay, so what we know is that denial and resistance shall continue. We shall see denial and resistance in ourselves and in others forever and ever. Amen. So
it's a human.
So it must be doing something to serve us. You know, it must be playing a role of some kind in our growth or something. And my question for you guys is, what is that? What is the role of denial
Good question.
or resistance?
It implies that it's a good role. I would say, if I read between the lines, the question,
that's the side of it
for me, it's protecting me. It's protection, form of protection. I think is for a lot of people, protection from embarrassment, protection from failure, being seen as a failure. It's definitely a protective mechanism. Unfortunately, it's not a very good one. It's not a productive one. That's why I said the role I don't think is particularly good. It is protective, and that's important especially in modern society. Back in the day when you had tigers and lions, being in denial was death. In our modern world,
or life, right? We're being if we think about but yeah, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, in the modern world, sometimes you just have to get through things. You can't. It's like a boss of mine once said, "You got to pick your battles." Sometimes just that denial and that resistance is just a way of parking in our brains. If you're working with a coach, you're just parking something because it will come back. But it is a protective. I think it's protective. It's maybe to keep us from going insane. Feeling terrible. I mean, people aren't denial. I used to think, oh, great, they're really honest with themselves. A lot of it becomes beating themselves up. Oh yeah, I know I suck at this. Well, thank you for being so self-aware, but you're actually doing yourself a huge disservice because you're so negative about yourself. That's no longer being honest and truthful. That's being just negative. And so I think it is in some way a protective force. And if you look at the opposite, where you're being honest with yourself, that can also go bad. I don't know, Darren, if you have anything you want to add to that.
I will continue on your word of protection because I think that's exactly what it is. It's insulation, denial. To go back to caveman times when we were hunters and gatherers, right? If we constantly lived in the reality that we can get eaten by a bear, we would have never succeeded. So we had to deny that reality.
We never would have left our caves.
That's exactly right. So denial is a protection method, and it can be used for good. But more often in this day and age, while we're not, all of us at least, running from an actual bear, well, I do hike, so that is a reality. But while we're not running, while we're not running from that, it serves as a hindrance, and it is a form of isolation versus insulation in this day and age, and it really serves to our detriment. I think when we've heard the term imposter syndrome more times than we want to ever hear again. So I'll bring it up again. But that is a reality.
Denial. You're not an imposter.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean
imposter syndrome, dare I say it, is wildly misunderstood and misstated by so many people. God. Imposter syndrome is nothing more than you having your 10,000 hours of practice being so good at something that it became so easy that you're surprised people are buying your shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
that's all it is.
Or the other thing is when you've taken on a challenge that is really, really challenging you, then you feel inadequate for a while. But that's not imposter syndrome. It means you've taken on something really difficult and you're feeling not as confident as you usually do. But that's not imposter syndrome.
No, but you can do it. So the reality is you had said the embarrassment, the vulnerability, the failure, right? The getting naked principles. When you can remove that and just learn that being honest and being completely open or admitting I'm depressed. What we all put up this wall. Like all of a sudden the bad energy is going to come in if I tell you guys that I'm depressed right now.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Right.
That's not so bad anymore. Just, yeah, you'll
Right.
get more people to align with you and be like, yeah, I'm depressed too. Life sucks.
Yeah.
Look at all the negative. What's to be
Yeah.
positive about? The
Yeah.
second that you can push past that barrier and just be a human being and realize that the work-life balance is over. It's all just life now. That's when denial stops. And that's when help comes in. And that's when you can propel yourself forward.
And
I
that's
love
where
it.
people may actually respect you more.
Yeah.
So that's a great way to end. Also, what I like is it did bring up something I forgot to say, which is we are 3 different generations. Certainly, I was in that generation that went from my father's, probably your grandfather's generation, that were deeply, deeply not willing to be open and vulnerable, the men at least. And it was all about, the strong, silent type and all sorts of things. By the time we got to Clayton, yeah, it is absolutely seen as an asset, I would say.
I'm all about it. Can I just say one more thing on that before we close out the denial thing? As you guys were talking, so I agree with the concept of the selective. We can only process so much, right? So we need to. The function of denial is to select for what we actually need to focus on, and then sometimes there actually is a bear that we need to focus on, and yet we're still selecting it out.
Right.
Mistake. That's not good. But just one last thing an idea that came to mind that I will think about, and maybe just food for thought, or just a weird esoteric idea, I don't know, is what if denial is not the thing that slows us down from getting to the next stage that we need to get to, but rather it's the thing that allows us to start working on that thing before we are ready.
Okay. I would say it slightly differently, but it's an interesting concept. I would say, at least especially when you were talking about it, I did realize there is a time factor here. The time denial and resistance is stalling, and therefore you're losing time. But I think what you're talking about in my world is not knowing what you don't know. And so if you start on something, sometimes you lose the time, not because you're in denial, it's because you actually don't know what you're doing or what's going to happen next. That's sort of how I think about it. But I agree that denial has a time factor, absolutely, and resistance has a time factor. In fact, that's, I think, one of the things that you said that I'm taking with me it's you're losing time if you go into too much denial and resistance. But sometimes also timing's everything. Sometimes you actually don't need to do the thing that you may be in denial. Maybe there's a better time to do it. So I don't know if that makes sense in this context, but thank you guys. As always, I had a great time. I also learned a lot. This reminds me, as always, that I love talking to other coaches because I learned so much. So again, thank you, and hopefully we'll continue the discussion. So thank you, everybody who listened in, and we'll see you. We'll start up our series again at the end of January, beginning of February, the winter season. Thank you.